Hey guys, tonight we're wading into a world that's sticky, stinky and downright medieval. Imagine stepping off a dirt road into a hidden quarter of town where the air curls your nostrils before you even see the first dripping hide. The ground squishes under your feet, the cobbles slick with something that's definitely not rainwater. You pass men with cracked hands and children carrying sloshing buckets of what smells suspiciously like... well, you'll find out. You probably won't survive this if you're squeamish. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know where you're listening from, and what time. It is always curious to hear how far these tales travel. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge down the narrow alleyway, pressing closer to the walls as carts rumble by loaded with fresh animal hides from the slaughterhouse. The Tanner's district is not where most visitors wander. Here the air is thick with a sour stench that no candle or flower garland can mask. You can almost taste it, a metallic tang, sharp and biting, mixed with the tang of rotting meat and the faint whiff of smoke from distant fires. Tanneries in medieval Europe were essential to daily life, but they were hidden away on the edges of towns or downwind from where respectable folks lived. Even in the best of times, these workshops were a swirling stew of putrefaction. The skins of cows, sheep, goats and pigs all ended up here, stacked in reeking heaps, waiting to be scraped, soaked and transformed. A historian might note that the layout of tanneries wasn't random. They were usually set along small waterway streams that fed directly into rivers, because those streams were vital for washing hides and carrying away waste. Of course, carrying away didn't mean it vanished, it meant it was carried downstream into someone else's drinking water. Medieval tanners didn't think twice about that. Their job was to survive, and that meant making leather any way they could. You notice a group of boys no older than 7 scurrying past with wooden buckets slopping with a yellowish liquid. Their fathers shout at them to move faster, the boys slipping on the slick ground as they go. You can't help but feel a pang. These kids probably don't even notice the stench anymore, born into it like fish in a pond. As you get closer, you see the hides themselves in various stages of horror. Some are raw and fresh, still streaked with blood from the slaughterhouse. Others have been soaking in giant vats, the edges already turning a sickly green, sloughing off the last bits of flesh. In the flickering torchlight, the hides gleam like wet wax piled high in what looks like a scene straight out of a nightmare. Medieval records show that tanning was considered both a vital trade and a disgusting one. The leather it produced was used for everything: shoes, belts, armour, book bindings. If you had leather in your life, you had a tanner to thank. Yet the tanner himself was the last person you'd invite to dinner. His hands were always blackened with the juices of his trade, his hair stiff with the oils and the dust. You wouldn't want to touch his skin, let alone share a meal with him. As you keep walking, you can't help but feel a creeping itch at the back of your throat. The air down here isn't just foul, it's dangerous. The pits are full of bacteria, and the flies buzz so thickly around them that it's almost like a living veil. There's a strange beauty in it though, sunlight catching on the surface of a slop pit, turning it gold for just a second before it shifts back to murky brown. A quirky detail you might not expect. Medieval tanners used every part of the animal. Some even believed that the tiny scraps of flesh still stuck to the hides had magical properties if properly treated. Historians still argue whether these beliefs were rooted in real results. Did those fleshy scraps actually help preserve the leather? Or was it just another odd medieval superstition? You pause by a low doorway, its wooden lintel etched with deep grooves from generations of scraping tools. Inside you glimpse a man at work. He stands over a hide stretched on a wooden frame, pulling a curved knife across the flesh with practiced ease. The knife makes a rhythmic rasping sound and the man hums as he works, lost in his own world. The hide, you realise, isn't just leather, it's the canvas of his survival. Outside the world is bustling, but in here it's all sweat, muscle and repetition. The tanner's arms ripple with the strain, his knuckles swollen and red. He pauses only to spit into the dirt before resuming his slow, steady scraping. The hide in front of him is destined to become something beautiful. A fine pair of gloves maybe, or a sturdy satchel. But right now it's just another piece of meat to be worked until it's tamed. Everywhere you look there's another small miracle of medieval labour. A boy hauls a bucket of lime, careful not to spill it on his bare feet. A woman carries fresh water, her shoulders stooped with the weight. An old man, his back twisted like an ancient tree, picks through scraps for anything that can be salvaged. It's a world of sweat and survival, and you're only just beginning to understand it. The sun starts to slip lower in the sky, casting the whole tannery in a soft golden glow. It's almost pretty if you can forget the smell for just a moment. You hear a snatch of laughter, someone telling a filthy joke to break the monotony, and it's oddly comforting. Even in this place of horror and hard labour, there's still room for a little bit of humour. You're starting to get used to the rhythm of it all, the scraping, the soaking, the endless cycle of rawhide and hard work. There's something timeless about it, something that speaks to the stubbornness of people who refuse to be broken by the filth around them. The tanner's world isn't pretty, but it's real, and it's been here quietly shaping the world for centuries. You edge a little deeper into the tannery and the pungent air clings to your nostrils like a curse. This time you're getting an up-close look at the real tools of this medieval trade, things that look more like instruments of torture than anything else. Buckets, knives and boards all scattered around in a chaotic dance of necessity. There's a man standing over a half-dismantled cowhide and he's humming softly as if the melody can drown out the stench that would make most of us gag. He's wielding a tool called a fleshing knife. Its curved blade sharp enough to cut clean through muscle. Back and forth he goes, scraping off every last scrap of tissue inch by inch. His forearms are roped with muscle, every tendon and vein visible under the thin layer of grime and sweat. You watch as he flicks away a chunk of fat, never pausing in his song. The fleshing process was vital for tanning, because even a thin layer of leftover flesh could cause the whole hide to rot, ruining days of labour in a single stinking misstep. A mainstream historical fact that can't be ignored by the 14th century tanning had become a recognised craft across Europe. Town charters in places like London and Paris carefully regulated where tanneries could operate and how they had to manage their waste. No one wanted the stench in their own backyard, yet everyone wanted the goods that stench produced. It's a contradiction that kept the tanner's world both essential and shunned. In one corner a barrel of thick reddish-brown liquid sloshes gently as a boy stirs it with a stick. That's brains, yes, you heard that right. Animal brains were used to help soften the hides. The enzymes in the brains broke down the proteins in the skin, making it more pliable and easier to work. So there's a kid knee-deep in a barrel of brains, swirling it around like it's soup for tonight's dinner. You almost have to laugh at the absurdity of it, though. The boy doesn't seem to be laughing. Historians still argue whether these methods, particularly the use of brains and other animal byproducts, made the leather truly superior, or just created a particularly rank environment. You see, medieval records talk about leather so fine it could be folded like cloth. But whether that was because of brains or just skilled craftsmanship is still up for debate. You move on, stepping carefully around a stack of barrels filled with another foul brew, a mixture of dog dung and water. You'd think I was making this up if I didn't have medieval records to back it up. This, pure as it was called, acted as a natural softening agent, working the hide into something more supple than any chemical bath could achieve. It's almost poetic in a disgusting sort of way. Dog dung, medieval luxury ingredient. The tanneries were places of constant motion. You watch a group of men working together like cogs in a grimy machine, one scraping another, hauling a third, stirring the vile brews that made their leather so prized. Each man's face is smeared with sweat and grime, but there's a quiet pride there too. These are not men who can afford to be delicate. They are practical, driven by the endless need to produce and sell to keep their families fed and clothed, even if the rest of the town turns up its nose when they walk by. A quirky fact in some places like medieval Florence, the tanners had their own special markets where they sold scraps and seconds little offcuts that would never make a proper shoe or glove. These scraps sometimes ended up as cheap belts for peasants, or even as padding in medieval armour, a weird echo of how luxury and poverty often walked side by side in this era. You notice the women too. They're there in the background, washing out hides in icy water, or carrying heavy loads of soaking skins. Their arms are thin but strong, and they move with the same rhythmic efficiency as the men. It's easy to forget how much of this work fell to women and children, every able hand pressed into service to keep the trade alive. You pass by a large wooden beam propped across a pit, a single hide stretched over it like some grisly banner. A man leans over it, scraping at the hide with practiced flicks of his knife. He's covered head to toe in splatters of who knows what, but his hands are steady and sure. You watch as he flips the hide over and starts again, as though this single scrap of cowskin is the most important thing in the world. The rhythmic sounds of scraping and sloshing seem to lull you into a sort of trance. There's an odd beauty to the repetitive work, to the way these men and women have mastered every step of this grisly process. You realise that this is not just a job, it's a lifetime of skill, of knowing exactly how to coax the best leather from even the rankest pile of animal remains. A flicker of movement catches your eye. A boy with a missing tooth grins at you as he carries a bundle of thin pale skins from one barrel to the next. His hands are red and raw from the lime, but he doesn't seem to mind. This is his world, and he wears it like a second skin. The sun slants through the tannery's small windows, catching the dust motes that swirl in the air. For a moment it's almost lovely, the light turning the muck and grime into something golden. But then the wind shifts and the stench rolls over you again, reminding you exactly where you are. This is no romantic scene, this is survival paid for in blood and sweat and more than a little dog dung. You pull back from the edge of a vat and feel your stomach lurch. Even with your modern sensibilities, you can't deny the strange respect you feel for these workers. They're part of a long chain of labour that clothed a kingdom, clothed knights in their boots, and peasants in their jerkin, all of them tied back to these men and women who braved the worst smells and the filthiest jobs to create something that would last. It's enough to make you pause and consider maybe those fancy leather shoes you wear today have a little bit of this history soaked into their seams. The stink might be gone, but the story lingers on. You stand there, nose wrinkled, as the next stage of the tanner's alchemy is revealed, soaking the hides in an unholy brew of urine and lime. It's enough to make even the bravest soul reconsider their place in this world, but here in the medieval tannery it's as normal as bread and ale. You watch as a burly man, arms stained a dull yellow, stirs a wooden vat filled with a cloudy sulphurous liquid. It's not just any water, it's human urine collected from chamber pots of local taverns and homes. In some towns it was even considered a civic duty to donate your morning's first offering. After all, every drop helped soften the leather, and besides it was a lot cheaper than any imported chemicals. Historians still argue whether the preference for urine was because of its natural ammonium salts, powerful enough to break down fat and grease, or simply because it was always in abundant supply. Whatever the reason, it worked. The urine mixed with lime stripped away the final bits of hair and flesh. clinging to the hides, turning them into something workable, something that would last. You lean over the edge of a soaking pit, gagging a little as the acrid fumes rise to greet you. The hides float limply in the grey water, their edges curling and softening as the mixture eats away at the last stubborn traces of life. The men nearby don't flinch or cough. They've long since stopped noticing the reek. A quirky fact emerges as you watch some towns even had professional piss collectors, men who roamed the streets gathering chamber pot contents and selling them to the tanners. Can you imagine the job title on that medieval resume, piss collector bringer of golden streams? It's not exactly the dream career of your childhood, but in a world where every scrap had a value, even urine had its place in the pecking order. The men working here move with careful purpose. One hauls a new load of hides from the slaughterhouse, while another scrapes lime off the softening skins, flicking the clumps of white residue back into the pit. Their hands are raw and swollen from constant exposure to the caustic brew. You notice how some of them wear makeshift gloves, scraps of leather tied around their palms to keep the worst of the burn at bay. But for most, their skin is just another tool, toughened and scarred, an extension of the knives and vats they wield. The soaking process could take days or even weeks, depending on the thickness of the hide and the temperature of the pit. In winter it was a freezing agony, hands plunged into icy piss water that turned fingers numb. In summer, the smell intensified, turning the tannery into a sauna of rot that clung to your skin and wouldn't let go. As you watch a boy no older than 9 tips a bucket of fresh urine into the vat, the yellow liquid swirling in delicate patterns before disappearing beneath the hides. He doesn't flinch, doesn't hold his nose. It's just another part of the job, another part of surviving in a world that didn't have the luxury of squeamishness. A mainstream historical fact worth pausing on: tanning was one of the oldest crafts in human civilization, dating back thousands of years. The ancient Egyptians, the Greeks, the Romans, they all had some form of leatherwork. But in medieval Europe, tanning was refined to an art form of sorts, with each region developing its own methods and recipes passed down from father to son in a lineage of stink. The man at the pit glances up at you, eyes bright beneath his grime-slicked brow. "Best batch we've had in weeks," he says, half grin, half challenge. You can't help but wonder what best means in a place like this: less hair left on the hides, less smell, or maybe just fewer lost fingers to the knife's slip. Historians still argue whether tanners were truly as tough as the legends say. Some accounts suggest they developed a kind of immunity to the bacteria and rot that would fell a lesser soul. Others insist they just died younger, worn out by the unrelenting exposure to filth and disease. Whatever the truth, you sense the quiet strength in these men and women as they move through the motions of their craft. You're drawn to a young girl standing at the edge of a pit, her skirts tucked up around her knees as she pokes at the hides with a long stick. Her face is set in concentration, every movement careful and deliberate. It's a reminder that tanning wasn't just a man's world, everyone pitched in. If you had family in the trade, you learned to help early and you learned fast. A joke drifts you away, carried on the breeze of laughter from a group of workers huddled near the doorway. "Careful, lad, if the piss don't get you, the wife's cooking will." It's a bit of gallows humour that lightens the gloom, a spark of shared humanity in the muck. You find yourself strangely fascinated by the quiet choreography of it all. The way the hides are moved from pit to pit, the precise order of soaking and scraping, the delicate balance between too much time in the brew and not enough. It's a science born of centuries of practice, and it's clear these tanners know every step by heart. As the day wears on, the tannery doesn't slow. There's always another hide to be scraped, another barrel to be filled. The rhythm is relentless, but there's a sort of grim dignity in it. These people know that their work matters, even if the rest of the world pretends to ignore them. The sun sinks low and shadows stretch across the tannery floor, softening the harsh edges of the vats and barrels. The smell, though, never fades. It's a reminder that in medieval life, comfort was a luxury most couldn't afford. Survival meant embracing the stink and the slime and finding your place in it. You take a last look around, noting the white streaks of lime on the walls, the yellow puddles on the ground, the men and women who labour on heedless of the filth. In this world, there is no room for hesitation or disgust, only the unending cycle of soaking, scraping and survival. You're drawn closer to the heart of the tannery now, the air turning almost solid, with the stink of rotting flesh and the faint tang of smoke. Here in the foul pits, hides aren't just soaked, they're broken down piece by piece until they're ready to be born anew. It's a strange, unsettling rebirth that leaves you blinking through the haze. The pits are deep stone-lined and slick with a slippery residue that never seems to dry. A man stands waist-deep in one of them, his legs braced against the current of slime and sludge. He works with a long wooden paddle, stirring the contents with slow, powerful strokes. Each time he lifts the paddle, thick ropes of muck trail behind it, glistening in the half-light. You realise that these are the rotting pits where the real transformation happens. Hides lie submerged in the dark brew, the liquid a swirling tapestry of browns and yellows and greens. The smell is beyond description, somewhere between sour milk and spoiled meat, with the tang of something metallic that makes your teeth ache. It's the scent of death and rebirth, a testament to the brutal cycle of medieval life. A mainstream historical fact for you, these pits were essential. The fermentation that happened here was part of what turned raw hide into leather. The bacteria in the rotting brew broke down the collagen in the skin, softening it and preparing it for the next stages of the process. Without these foul-smelling pits, there'd be no supple leather, no fine boots or belts. It was a necessary evil, a medieval marvel of biochemistry, though no one back then would have called it that. You watch as the man lifts a hide from the pit, the leather dripping and heavy, almost too much for him to manage alone. He slings it over a wooden beam to drain his face, set in a grimace of effort. The water streams off it in rivulets, splattering the ground with brownish droplets. There's something almost tender in the way he handles it, as if he knows that within this ruin lies something valuable, something that will outlast even his own tough hands. Historians still argue whether medieval tanners truly understood the fermentation happening in these pits. Some believe they did, that generations of observation taught them the perfect balance of time and temperature. Others say it was a luck and intuition, a dance of trial and error that never quite lost its edge. A quirky detail you might not expect: in some places old leather scraps were added to the pits to seed them like a sourdough starter. The theory was that the decaying leather helped the process along, feeding the bacteria that did the real work. It's a strange echo of how nothing went to waste here. Everything had a purpose, even the scraps. You stand back watching as another man climbs into a neighbouring pit. He's older, his face seamed with deep lines, his hair gone to a scraggly grey. He moves with a slow, deliberate grace, as though every motion is calculated to spare his aching joints. His hands, though those are sure and strong, pull in the hides from the slurry, with a confidence that only comes from years of practice. He catches your eye and winks a flash of humour in a place that seems to have no room for it. "Smells like money," he says with a grin, and you can't help but chuckle even as your stomach churns. The tanner's world is full of these odd contradictions, disgust and necessity, rot and renewal. You see it in the way the workers talk and laugh, even as they stand waist-deep in filth. It's a kind of resilience that we can't help but admire, even as you silently vow never to complain about your own job again. A group of children scurry by carrying armfuls of fresh hides to be added to the pits. Their bare feet slap against the slick stones, their faces set in concentration. You wonder how they can stand the smell, but then you remember they've never known anything else. To them this is normal, this is life. You notice how the hides seem to shift in the pits, moving with the slow, lazy motion of something alive. It's hypnotic in a way, watching the water swirl the hides rise and fall with each gentle current. You almost forget how those hides started out clinging to the flesh of animals that once breathed and bleated and ran. The men here don't have the luxury of forgetting. They know every step of this process by heart, every hazard it hides. A slip of the foot, a careless motion, and you could find yourself submerged in the slurry, the rotting brew swallowing you whole. It's happened before the old man tells you. We lost a boy last winter, slipped and never came back up. Poor lad. His voice is calm, but there's a flicker of something in his eyes, a shadow that never quite fades. A joke bubbles up among the workers, something about better to drown in dung than starve in the fields. It's the sort of gallows humour that keeps the fear at bay, the laughter a shield against the grim reality of their trade. As the day wears on, you watch the rhythm of the work, soaking, stirring, pulling, scraping. The pits are never still, the workers never idle. Even when the sun dips low and the cold creeps in, the tanners keep at it, driven by the knowledge that each hide means food on the tablecloths on their children's backs. You find yourself strangely mesmerised by the quiet determination in every scrape of the knife, every scoop of the paddle. It's a kind of brutal poetry, a testament to the stubborn will of people who refuse to let the stink and the slime break them. The shadows grow longer, the air turns colder, but the tannery keeps pulsing with life. You take one last look at the rotting pits, the men and women who work them, and you feel a grudging respect for their resilience. In this place of decay and darkness, there's also a spark of hope, a reminder that even in the foulest corners of the medieval world, people found a way to survive. The tannery has a rhythm all its own, and tonight you're noticing the smallest cogs in this grim machine, children who move through the shadows like tiny ghosts. Their hands are small but strong, their eyes already old with the weight of survival. You watch as they scurry across the tannery floor, buckets in hand, feet bare and tough as leather. In the medieval world, childhood wasn't the gentle season we imagine today. If you were born into a tanner's family, you didn't wait long before you were pressed into service. There was no daycare, no sweet lullaby, only the endless work of survival. Historians still argue whether these children were apprentices in the truest sense, or simply cheap labour forced into back-breaking toil. Whatever the truth, there's no denying their presence in these pits of rot. You see a girl, maybe 6 years old, her face smeared with a ghostly white dusting of lime. She's carrying a small pail, sloshing with the rancid mixture that softens the hides. Her fingers are red and raw, but she moves with practiced ease, stepping carefully around the older workers as if she's always known this world. She doesn't flinch at the stench, it's the smell of her home. A mainstream historical fact in medieval Europe, child labour was the norm, not the exception. Guild records and town laws might speak of apprenticeships and craft rights, but the truth was simpler and harsher. If you were old enough to stand, you were old enough to work. In the tanneries, children learned the trade at their father's elbows, every scrape of the knife and swirl of the soaking pit, a lesson in how to survive. You watch a boy climb a rickety ladder to pour a bucket of dog dung into a vat, his bare toes gripping the wood. His face is set in concentration, every movement deliberate. The adults call out to him a mix of teasing and instruction. He's one of them, already part of the cycle that will claim his back and bones before he's grown. A quirky detail floats to your mind. Some medieval towns even had rules about how close tanneries could be, to schools or churches worried that the filth and corruption might stain the children in more ways than one. But here in the tannery itself, no one worries about that. The children are here because they have to be, because every pair of hands means another hide scraped clean, another meal earned. The children's tasks are small but vital. They fetch water from the river, slipping and sliding down the muddy banks with buckets almost as big as they are. They carry scraps of hide to the piles of refuse where the stink is worst and no adult wants to linger long. They help their mothers wash the hides in freezing water, their fingers blue and numb by the time they're done. You watch as a small boy stops to scratch at his skin, the lime burning into the cracks of his knuckles. He doesn't cry or complain, there's no point. Here, pain is as common as hunger. Another fact of life in the tannery's grim ballet. The sun sinks lower, turning the sky above the tannery into a dark wash of purples and oranges. The children's shadows stretch long across the cobblestones, flickering in the torchlight that flares against the tannery walls. It's a strangely beautiful moment, the world caught between light and dark, innocence and labour. One of the older boys grins at you as he passes his teeth white against the grime of his face. You get used to it, he says with a shrug, as if the tannery's horrors are just another part of the world. You nod, though you're not sure you believe him. A mainstream fact worth noting, tanners' children often inherited the trade generation after generation. It was a cycle as relentless as the tannery's pits' fathers, teaching sons, mothers teaching daughters the knowledge of how to work the hides passed down with every scrape and stir. Some families could trace their line of tanners back centuries, a grim lineage marked by stained hands and stooped shoulders. The work isn't just physical, it's a kind of alchemy, a transformation that demands everything. The children learn to watch the hides with the same practiced eye as their elders, to feel the difference between leather that will last and leather that will crack and rot. It's a hard-earned skill born of endless repetition and the ever-present risk of failure. Historians still argue whether this constant exposure to filth and disease built a kind of hardiness in these children, or whether it simply stole their childhoods too soon. You watch them move and wonder what dreams they carry in their sleep. Do they even dream of anything beyond these pits of rot? A small laugh bubbles up from a group of children as they share a crust of bread, their dirty fingers tearing at the hard loaf. One of them tells a joke about a tanner who fell in love with a pig, and the others giggle, the sound bright and defiant in the gloom. It's a reminder that even in the foulest places, laughter finds a way to slip through the cracks. As the darkness settles in the tannery becomes a different world. The torches cast flickering shadows across the vats, the pits, the endless piles of hides. The children's voices blend with the soft murmur of the adults, a lullaby of survival that's as old as the trade itself. You take one last look at the children, their faces lit by the warm glow of the flames, their bodies bent to work. They're small, but they're part of something ancient and stubborn, something that's outlasted plagues and wars and the endless turning of the seasons. You feel a pang of sadness for them and a flicker of awe. In this place of filth and fear, they're learning the hard truths of the world, how to endure, how to laugh in the darkness, how to find meaning in the scraps left behind. It's a lesson you can almost taste in the air, as sharp and bitter as the tannery's stench. You notice the subtle way everyone turns their face as you walk by, the quick glances they exchange when they think you're not looking. It's not just the stink of the tannery that sets these workers apart, it's something deeper, something older. In a world that prized clean water and sweet-smelling air, the tanner was the ultimate outcast. Village pariahs shunned and smelled, they carried their trade's reek wherever they went. It's an odd kind of exile, one that doesn't come from distance but from an invisible barrier, a thin, oily film of disgust that clings to the tanner like a second skin. Historians still argue whether this social exile was born from fear of disease, disgust at the constant rot, or a mix of both. Whatever the reason, you can see it in the way people keep their distance, the way their faces tighten when a tanner passes by. A mainstream historical fact, many medieval towns had ordinances that forced tanneries to the very edges of their borders. In Paris, tanners worked along the Bièvre River, far from the bustling markets and clean stone squares. In Florence, they were confined to the banks of the Arno, kept downstream of the city's fine palaces and bustling piazzas. The tanner's stink was both a necessity and a punishment, a sign that their labour was essential, but their presence was not. You see it in the children's eyes too. There's a watchfulness there, a flicker of caution whenever someone from outside the trade walks by. They know even at 6 or 7 that they're different, that no matter how fine their leather, no matter how strong their hands, they'll never quite belong. A quirky tidbit in some towns, tanners had their own special saints like St. Crispin and St. Hugh, protectors of cobblers and leatherworkers. People said those saints looked kindly on the tanners, even if their neighbours did not. It was a small comfort, a reminder that someone somewhere thought their work was worth blessing. The sun has slipped below the horizon now, and the tannery is lit by flickering torches and the occasional lamp of oil or tallow. You see a group of tanners gathered at the edge of the yard, passing a flask between them, sharing a rough bread and a few quiet jokes. It's a moment of companionship in a world that would rather forget they exist. One of the men sees you watching and raises his cup with a wry grin. "Evening, friend," he says, his voice raspy from years of breathing in the tannery's fumes. "Care for a sip might chase the stink from your nose, though I make no promises." You smile and shake your head, and he laughs, the sound echoing off the stone walls like the bark of a wolf in the night. A boy sits apart from the men, his back pressed to the rough wooden boards of a shed. He's cleaning a small knife with a scrap of rag, his movements careful and precise. You wonder if he's practicing for his future, learning to carve away not just flesh, but the fear that comes with it. Historians still argue whether this social exile made tanners closer to each other, whether the shared stink and the shared shame became a kind of bond. You watch them now, and you're inclined to believe it. In the laughter that bubbles up from the group, in the easy way they lean into each other's space, there's a closeness that feels unshakable. But the outside world is never far away. A woman walks past the tannery's low wall, her skirts gathered up against the filth. She spares the workers a single glance, her nose wrinkling as if she smelled something sour. Then she's gone, her steps quick and deliberate, her back a stiff line of rejection. The tanners don't seem to notice, or maybe they're just used to it. They turn back to their bread and their flask, their world, a tight circle of jokes and jibes. You get the sense that in the tannery the world outside doesn't matter much. The work is enough, the stink is enough. Everything else is just noise. A small detail catches your eye. One of the older men has a charm tied around his wrist, a tiny piece of leather stamped with a symbol you don't recognize. It's a bit of superstition, maybe a protection against the sickness that always hovers in the tannery shadows. You wonder how many of these workers carry little talismans like that, quiet prayers to saints or spirits to keep them safe. A burst of laughter echoes across the yard, and for a moment the tannery feels almost warm, almost safe. But then the wind shifts and the smell of rot and lime rolls over you again, sharp enough to make your eyes water. The laughter fades, swallowed up by the stink. You realise that for the tanners this is the balance they live with every day, between the bonds of their trade and the rejection of the world beyond, between the laughter of their own kind and the silence of those who won't meet their eyes. As the torches flicker and the night deepens, you take one last look at the tanners gathered there. They're pariahs, yes, but they're also craftsmen, survivors, and keepers of a knowledge that's older than the cobblestones beneath your feet. In the end, maybe that's enough. You're about to move on when something catches your nose, an odour so specific, so ripe, that it drags your attention back to the heart of the tannery. Dog dung. Yes, that's right, dog dung. Here in the medieval tannery, even the unlikeliest of materials had a role to play. You watch as a young boy, face set in determined concentration, carry a bucket of the stuff with the sort of reverence that would make a cathedral priest jealous. Dog dung, known in polite circles as pure, was used to soften hides. It sounds like a sick joke, but in truth it was a crucial step in the leather-making process. The enzymes in the dung helped break down the tough collagen in the hides, turning stiff skin into something that could be worn and worked. Historians still argue whether it was purely practicality or a belief in its near-magical properties that kept this odd practice alive century after century. A mainstream historical fact for you: medieval recipes for tanning explicitly mention dog dung, along with pigeon droppings in some places as essential ingredients. It wasn't just a matter of finding any old excrement. Different towns swore by different breeds of dog, convinced that the quality of the dung shaped the quality of the leather. A strange sort of hierarchy where even a dog's bowel habits took on a kind of social importance. You watch as the boy tips the bucket into a low trough. The liquid squelches as it hits the pile of hides, a sickly slurry that seems almost alive. He doesn't flinch at the splash. This is just another day, another step in the endless transformation of skin to leather. Nearby, a woman kneels with a long wooden paddle, stirring the mixture with a slow, steady rhythm. Her face is calm, her hands sure. She hums softly under her breath, a lullaby to the stink, a song to keep the mind from wandering to just how foul this work truly is. A quirky detail: there were actual dog-keeping ordinances in some medieval cities written not for companionship, but to ensure a steady supply of dung for the tanners. It's a reminder of how everything in medieval life was connected, every creature and every waste product woven into the tapestry of survival. You catch a snatch of conversation between two workers, voices low and amused. "Heard the baker's dog's been eating better than the baker himself," one says with a wink. "Fat dog, fat dung. Best in town." They laugh a dark kind of humour that only makes sense in a place where you measure the worth of an animal by what it leaves behind. The smell is almost too much to bear, but the workers don't seem to notice. They're too busy working the hides, kneading them in the slurry, their hands moving in practiced, almost tender motions. You see the strength in those hands, the quiet endurance. It's a different kind of skill than you find in a knight's sword or a noble's pen, but no less impressive. The sun has dipped low, and the tannery is bathed in the soft glow of oil lamps. Shadows flicker across the walls, turning the piles of hides and barrels of filth into something almost otherworldly. The workers move through this strange landscape like ghosts, their laughter and low voices, the only sign that this is a place of life, not just decay. A mainstream historical fact worth repeating: leather was one of the most essential materials of the medieval world. It clothed the poor and the rich, bound the pages of books and armoured the knights on their horses. Every scrap of hide was precious, and every step in its transformation was a dance between filth and function. You watch as a man dips his hands into the slurry, the liquid lapping at his wrists. He lifts a hide, inspecting it with a craftsman's eye, fingers prodding the edges to feel for just the right softness. Satisfied, he sets it aside and reaches for another. It's a rhythm, a quiet ritual that feels as old as the hills themselves. A small girl pauses nearby her hands, red from the lime pits, and watches the man with wide, curious eyes. You can see the way she studies his every move, the way she mimics his motions with her own small fingers. This is how the craft is passed down, not in books or lectures, but in these quiet moments of shared labour and silent teaching. Historians still argue whether tanners saw this work as a burden or a point of pride. The wages were meagre, the stench unending, but there's no mistaking the care in the way they handle the hides, the respect in every scrape and stroke. In a world that prized clean linen and sweet perfumes, these men and women carved out their own kind of honour, one handful of dung at a time. A sudden gust of wind rattles the walls, carrying the smell of the tannery down the narrow alleys and into the sleeping town beyond. You wonder how many people in the fine houses nearby ever think about the hands that make their shoes, the skins that hold their wine. Probably not many, but here in this low-lit corner of the world there's no forgetting. Every scrape, every swirl of the paddle, every bucket of dog dung is a testament to the simple fact that someone must always do the dirty work. But without the stink there'd be no comfort, no luxury. No soft leather gloves to slip over a noble's pampered fingers. You take one last breath, the stink of dung and rot filling your nose, and step back. This part of the tannery is a small world all its own, a world of laughter and labour, of filth and pride. A world that most would turn away from, but one that holds the rough, unvarnished truth of medieval life. You step away from the dog dung pits and find yourself in a smaller, quieter corner of the tannery, where the clink of metal on wood and the rhythmic scrape of tools fill the air. This is where the bones and barrels come into play, the raw implements of the trade that turn death into daily bread. The first thing you notice is the smooth curve of a fleshing knife, its blade glinting in the lamplight. A man is using it to scrape the last bits of fat from a cowhide stretched tight over a wooden beam. His hands move in a dance of precision, back and forth, like he's shaving away the world's worries, one curl of flesh at a time. You watch the knife flash in the dim glow, the curved blade perfectly shaped to the job. It's the kind of tool that's been honed by generations of tanners, each pass of the blade a small echo of their lives. A mainstream historical fact, tanners used these knives along with large wooden paddles and stout beams to work the hides. The paddles stirred the pits of rot, the barrels held the liquids of transformation, and the knives teased out every last scrap of flesh. Nothing was wasted, every tool had a purpose, every motion an echo of the trade's ancient rhythms. Nearby a boy stands over a barrel, a thick stick in his hands. He's stirring a mixture of lime and water so caustic it could burn the skin from your bones if you weren't careful. The barrel itself is a work of art in its own grim way, the wooden staves bound tight with iron hoops that have turned black with the tannery's fumes. A quirky detail that might make you smile. Some tanners used fish bones as scrapers when metal was scarce or expensive. The sharp ridges of the bones worked almost as well as a blade turning trash from the rivers into a tool of the trade. It's a reminder that medieval life was nothing if not resourceful. You watch as another worker slams the barrel's lid back into place, the sound echoing like a drumbeat across the yard. The barrels themselves are marvels of medieval craftsmanship, coopered tight to keep the liquids in and the world out. The smell that seeps from the cracks is enough to make your eyes water, but no one here seems to notice. Historians still argue whether these tools were passed down as family heirlooms or simply made fresh when they broke. Some claim a good fleshing knife was worth more than a year's wages, a precious thing to be guarded and cherished. Others insist that in the constant churn of the tannery nothing lasted long enough to be called an heirloom. You see a woman working a hide stretched over a curved wooden frame, her small knife flicking in quick sure motions. She hums as she works the tune, bright and soft against the scrape of the blade. Her hair is tied back with a strip of old leather, and her fingers move like they've done this 1,000 times. You realise she probably has. A boy no more than 10 watches her with bright, curious eyes. He's holding a small bone scraper, the kind passed down from older brothers or cousins, and he mimics her motions in the air. His hands are stained with lime, his nails black with filth, but his expression is intent, focused on every flick of the woman's wrist. The tools themselves are heavy, worn smooth by years of work. You run your fingers along the edge of a barrel and feel the rough grain of the wood, the iron hoops cool and slick beneath your touch. It's a small silent testament to the generations of tanners who have stood here doing this same work in the same flickering light. A mainstream historical fact worth noting, many medieval towns had strict rules about how these tools could be used and maintained. A broken paddle or a dull knife wasn't just an inconvenience, it was a threat to the entire process. If the tools failed, the leather failed. And if the leather failed, so did the tanner's family. A sudden laugh echoes across the yard and you turn to see two men testing the edge of a blade on a scrap of hide. Sharp enough to shave a bishop's head, one crows and the other guffaws, the sound rolling out into the dark like a drumbeat. It's a small moment of levity in a place that seems made of shadows and stink. Historians still argue whether tanners ever truly saw these tools as more than just implements. Some say they were extensions of their hands, others that they were the chains of a trade they could never escape. Watching the way these men and women move the way they hold the knives like old friends, you're inclined to think it's a little of both. As the night deepens, the yard grows quieter, the scraping and stirring slowing to a steady murmur. The tools are cleaned and oiled, the barrels sealed tight against the dark. There's a reverence to it, a quiet respect for the things that make survival possible in a world that rarely spares a kind word for the lowly tanner. You take one last look at the gleaming knives, the battered barrels, the men and women who wield them like an orchestra of survival. In the flickering lamplight they seem almost holy relics of a craft that has outlasted kings and empires, held fast by the strong scarred hands of those who refuse to let the stink or the scorn break them. You turn your attention to the tanners themselves, their hands marked with the long, painful history of this trade. Here the real cost of medieval leather shows itself in every cracked knuckle, every burn, every line that will never fade. It's not a job for soft fingers or tender skin, it's a trade that brands you as surely as any forge brands iron. You notice a man in his 40s, though he looks older. His fingers are stained a permanent brown, the skin around his nails so calloused it's cracked like old leather. Each scrape of his knife across the hide is a testament to the years he's spent in this pit of rot. His hands move steadily without hesitation, even though you can see the swelling in his knuckles the way they bend just a little, too far in the wrong direction. A mainstream historical fact, the chemicals used in tanning like lime and urine were brutal on the skin. Workers suffered from constant burns and infections, their fingers eaten away by the very liquids that made the hide soft. And yet they worked on because there was no other choice. The leather had to be made and they were the ones to make it. A small boy stands nearby watching the man's hands with quiet fascination. You can almost see the future in that boy's eyes. He'll grow into those same hands, those same scars. It's a cycle as endless as the tanneries stink, a quiet inheritance of pain and survival. A quirky tidbit, some medieval folk believed that tanners had special hands that could ward off disease, even heal minor cuts faster because of constant exposure to foul substances. Historians still argue whether there's any truth to this, or if it were just a way to give meaning to a life that most people turn their noses up at. You watch the man flex his fingers, wincing as the knuckles crack. He rubs his hands together, the motion as automatic as breathing, before plunging them back into the murky vat. The skin of his palms is rough as tree bark, the deep lines etched like a map of hard labour. A woman nearby dips her hands into a barrel of lime water, her face tight with concentration. When she pulls them out, the skin is ghostly white, the nails rimmed in red. She wipes them on her apron, the movement brisk, almost careless. You realise it's not because she doesn't feel the pain, it's because she's learned to live with it. The workers' hands are their tools as much as the knives and paddles are. Every scrape of hide, every swirl of the paddle is guided by fingers that know exactly how much pressure to use, how much weight to give. It's a dance of instinct and memory passed down in blood and sweat. A mainstream historical fact worth noting, tanners' hands were considered unclean by medieval society. In some places they weren't allowed to serve as witnesses in court, their touch thought to taint even the law itself. And yet their work was essential. Without them, the lords and ladies would have no gloves to pull on, no boots to stride across their marble floors. You see a boy no older than 12 scrubbing at his hands with sand and water, trying to wash away the stink that never really leaves. His fingers are red and raw, the skin peeling at the tips. He glances up and gives you a shy smile, a flicker of pride in his eyes. You wonder if he knows that these hands of his will never be clean. Not really. Historians still argue whether the tanners themselves saw this mark as a curse or a badge of honour. Some records hint that tanners took pride in their stained hands, a sign that they were the backbone of the medieval world. Others suggest they longed for the luxury of soap and sweet-smelling oils, a chance to be seen as more than the stink they carried. A small group of workers gather around a trough, their hands working in a quiet, practiced rhythm. They speak softly, their words lost in the rustle of leather and the faint slap of water against wood. You watch their fingers move, twisting and pulling, the movements as old as the tannery itself. One of the men laughs, holding up his hand as if showing off a trophy. "Look at that," he says, the grin in his voice warm and self-mocking. "Skin like an old boot and twice as tough." The others laugh with him, the sound quick and bright in the night. You feel a strange respect for these hands, these battered, stained tools of survival. In a world where so much is fleeting, so easily lost, these hands endure. They hold the history of this place, in every crack and scar a living record of the labour that shapes the world. As the night deepens, the workers pause to rub their palms together, the rough skin rasping like sandpaper. There's no complaint, no word of protest. This is the price they pay for the soft leather that graces the feet of kings and the belts that bind the tunics of peasants. It's a price they know well, one they've learned to bear without bitterness. You take one last look at their hands as they plunge back into the vats, the rhythm of scraping and swirling, resuming as if it had never stopped. In the flickering torchlight, the red and brown stains on their skin almost glow, a testament to the quiet, stubborn strength of the medieval tanner. As you step further into the tannery's shadowy depths, you notice something odd in the air, an undercurrent of belief that seems to swirl with the stink and the steam. In this place of filth and constant labour, there's talk of a curious benefit to the tanner's trade, something you might call a dubious health perk. A man stands with his sleeves rolled up, bare arms, streaked with lime and the faint yellow stain of urine. He grins at you as he lifts a hide from a barrel, his eyes twinkling in the torchlight. "You know," he says, almost conspiratorial, "some folks say, this work keeps us safe from plague. All these fumes, all this filth, it's like armour against the sickness." He laughs and the sound echoes off the stone walls, almost defiant. A mainstream historical fact during outbreaks of plague, some believed that the tanners' constant exposure to noxious fumes and bacteria made them less likely to catch the disease. Whether there was any truth to it or not is still debated by historians, but in a time when fear of pestilence hung over every street like a shadow, even the smallest hope was worth clinging to. You watch as the man tosses the hide onto a rack, his movements quick and sure. The air is heavy with the stink of decay, but he doesn't seem to mind. To him it's a familiar perfume, a shield against the greater dangers that lurk beyond the tannery walls. A quirky tidbit that might surprise you: some medieval medical texts actually recommended the tannery's reeking atmosphere as a cure for certain ailments, bad air driving out worse air, they said. It's a theory that would make a modern doctor blanch, but in a world of bloodletting and leeches it didn't seem so far-fetched. You see a group of women working in a corner, their faces pale but calm as they scrub hides in icy water. One of them glances at you and smiles faintly, her hands never stopping. "They say the stink keeps the spirits away," she says softly, her voice almost lost in the splash of water. "I don't know about spirits, but it keeps the neighbours away at least." There's a small, bitter humour in her words, a flicker of defiance in her eyes. Historians still argue whether these beliefs were born of actual observations. Did the constant exposure to filth and rot somehow toughen the tanners' bodies? Or was it just a story they told themselves to make the work bearable? You watch the way they move, the easy strength in their arms, and you wonder if maybe there's some truth in it after all. A boy walks by with a bundle of fresh hides, his small body bent under the weight. He's humming a tune, the melody bright and simple, and for a moment it almost drowns out the stink. His face is flushed, but there's no fear in his eyes, just the calm acceptance of a child who's never known anything else. You notice the worker's skin darkened and toughened by years of exposure. It's almost like leather itself, a second hide that shields them from the cold and the bite of lime. There's a quiet pride in the way they carry themselves, as if they know that no matter how the world sees them, they're made of sterner stuff. A mainstream historical fact worth pausing on: leather was a symbol of status and durability in the medieval world, but the tanners who made it were often barred from the very social circles that prized their goods. It's a strange contradiction. These men and women could shape the finest leather, but they'd never be invited to wear it to a noble's feast. A sudden gust of wind sends the stink of the vats rolling over you in a fresh wave, and you fight back a cough. The workers don't flinch. One of them winks at you. "Good for the lungs," he says with a laugh. "Better than any doctor's potion." It's a jest, but there's an edge of truth to it, a hint of the deep, unshakable belief that they've found some secret strength in the very thing that makes others gag. You pause to watch a young woman scrubbing her arms in a bucket of water turned brown with grime. Her skin is raw, but she works with a steady, practiced rhythm. There's no complaint in her face, no flicker of doubt. For her, the tannery's dangers are just another fact of life, no worse than the biting wind of winter, or the ever-present hunger in the cold months. Historians still argue whether this belief in the health perks of tanning was a comfort or a curse. Maybe it was both a way to make sense of the filth, to find a scrap of dignity in work that no one else wanted to see. You watch the workers trade jests and share bread in the torchlight, and you realise that in this place of stink and scrape they've found their own kind of strength. As the night deepens, the tannery's sounds soften a lullaby of water and knives, the low murmur of voices, the scrape of hide on wood. You breathe in the air thick and bitter, and you almost believe what the tanners say, that in this world of rotten ruin there's a kind of protection to be found. That maybe there's a health in the stink after all. You wander deeper into the tannery and find yourself drawn into the tight-knit circle of the Tanners' Guild. In this world of stench and sweat, there's a curious kind of order. A brotherhood and sometimes sisterhood of workers who protect their own, with a fierce loyalty that's as tough as the hides they shape. A man stands in the centre of a small group, his voice low but strong as he explains the day's tasks. His words are simple, practical. There's no room for poetry here, but you can feel the weight of respect in the way the others listen. In the medieval tannery, the guild was everything: protection, community, and the thin line between survival and ruin. A mainstream historical fact, tanners' guilds existed in almost every major medieval town from London to Florence. These guilds set rules for how the trade was practiced, who could join, and how disputes were settled. They were a lifeline for men and women who would otherwise be at the mercy of landlords and merchants, a fragile net of security in a dangerous world. You watch as the tanners move together, each with a role to play, one stirring the lime pits, another scraping hides, a third measuring and cutting. It's a silent choreography, the kind that comes from years of working side by side, every motion learned from the generation before. You realise there's a pride here too, pride in a craft that most people would never understand. A quirky tidbit floats to mind: some guilds had secret handshakes or symbols, small ways to show you were part of the brotherhood. A scrap of leather tied around the wrist, a mark carved into the handle of a knife, tiny signs that said, "I belong here." In a world that turned its nose up at the tanner's trade, these small badges of belonging meant everything. You catch a snatch of laughter as a young boy tries to mimic the older men scraping at a scrap of hide with a dull blade. "Careful there, lad," one of them calls out with a grin. "Don't take your thumb off before you're a master." The boy laughs and redoubles his efforts, his face bright with the simple joy of being part of something bigger than himself. Historians still argue whether the guilds were truly fair. Did they lift everyone up, or did they just protect the few who could pay their dues? The truth, like the tannery smell, is complicated and never quite clear. But here in this moment you see the guild for what it is. A small island of order in a world that's always teetering on the edge of chaos. A woman passes by her skirts tucked up to keep them from the filth. She carries a bundle of scraps, bits of hide, too small for belts or boots, but perfect for patching gloves or lining the inside of a coffer. Her hands are quick and sure, and she nods to the men as she moves through their circle. In this guild, everyone has a place, even if the world outside sees them only as outcasts. A mainstream historical fact worth noting: in some towns, the guilds had their own feasts and festivals, days when the tanners would lay down their knives and gather to share bread and ale. These were rare moments of laughter and song, brief flashes of light in lives spent in the shadows of stink and scorn. You watch as the men pause their work to share a loaf of bread, their laughter soft and warm in the cool night air. It's a small act of kindness, but it feels like a kind of defiance too, a way of saying, we're still here no matter how the world tries to forget us. A small boy sits at the edge of the circle, his eyes wide as he watches the older men trade jokes and share scraps of meat. He's too young to work the hides yet, but you can see the hunger in his gaze, the way he soaks up every word and motion. This is his inheritance, these men, this trade, this strange stinking brotherhood. Historians still argue whether the guilds were as powerful as they claimed. In some towns they held the ear of the city council, in others they were little more than a name. But here in the tannery's flickering light, the power of the guild is real enough. Real in the shared laughter, the quiet moments of teaching, the silent understanding that no matter how foul the stink or how heavy the load, they are never alone. The night deepens, and the tannery's sounds soften to a low hum of voices and the gentle scrape of knives on hide. The guild's leader rises, his face calm and sure in the lamplight. He nods to the others, a small gesture that says everything. The work will go on tomorrow and the next day and the next. The hides will be soaked, the knives will be honed, and the stink will never fade. But in the end, that's all right, because here in this circle of outcasts and craftsmen, they have each other. You step back from the huddle of the guild and look around at the work that fills every inch of the tannery's yard. The leather once just dead skin is becoming something new, something to be worn, used, cherished. And it's not just for the rich or the warriors. This stinking trade makes goods for everyone from kings in their castles to peasants trudging the fields. A mainstream historical fact in medieval Europe, leather was as common as wool or linen. It clothed the bodies of noblemen and serfs alike. It became the straps that held armour together, the shoes that carried you down muddy roads, the belts that bound tunics tight against the cold. And every piece of it started here in the tannery's foul pits. You watch a woman as she carefully lays out newly finished hides, smoothing each one with practiced hands. The leather shines in the torchlight, rich and supple, a far cry from the bloody mess it was just days ago. She steps back, admiring her work for a moment, before turning to the next task. There's pride in her gaze, a flicker of triumph in the shadows. A young boy carries a bundle of leather strips, weaving his way through the jumble of barrels and beams. The strips will become laces or bindings for books, or perhaps the straps of a travelling merchant's pack. He doesn't pause to wonder who will use them. His world is here in the scrape and soak of the tannery's daily churn. A quirky tidbit that brings a smile. Medieval children sometimes played games with scraps of leather, crafting tiny balls or crude dolls from the leftovers no one else wanted. Even in a place of constant toil, there was always room for a moment of play, a flash of childhood in the stink and the sweat. You see a man working a large hide, cutting it into shapes that will become shoes for peasants and gloves for merchants. His knife glides through the leather with a quiet assurance, each cut a small act of transformation. He doesn't glance up as he works. The leather demands all his attention and he gives it gladly. Historians still argue whether the tanners took pride in this final step of their craft. Some say they saw it as a chance to shape the world, even if that world never saw them. Others insist it was just another part of the endless cycle, a way to feed their families and keep the landlord at bay. But watching the man's careful hands, you're inclined to think there's a kind of quiet pride here too. The air is thick with the smell of fresh leather, sharp, almost sweet a scent that seems to push back the rankness of the pits for just a moment. You close your eyes and breathe it in, imagining the journey this leather will take. A belt that will cinch a peasant's tunic, a pair of shoes that will carry a merchant down dusty roads, a glove that will cradle a knight's sword hand. All of it born here in the tannery's harsh embrace. A group of children sit in the corner weaving scraps of leather into rough braids. They work with bright eyes and nimble fingers, the laughter bubbling up in the spaces between their tasks. One girl braids a piece of leather into a thin loop and holds it up like a prize. For luck, she says with a grin, and the others nod as if luck is something you can tie into a strip of hide. A mainstream historical fact worth repeating: leather goods were traded across Europe from the markets of London to the fairs of Flanders. Tanners' wares found their way into the hands of knights and nuns, minstrels and merchants. It was a trade that touched every corner of the medieval world, even if the men and women who made it were kept at arm's length. A sudden gust of wind ruffles the neat piles of leather, sending scraps tumbling across the yard. The children scramble after them, laughing as they chase the bits of hide like autumn leaves. For a moment the tannery feels almost light, almost bright, a flash of joy in a place that seems so much toil. You notice a small group of workers talking in low voices, their hands moving in quick practiced gestures as they trade scraps and measure out pieces. They're deciding who will take what to market, who will sell to the cobblers and the cloth merchants, who will haggle with the town's saddlers for the best price. It's a dance of economics and survival, as essential as the soaking pits and the scraping knives. Historians still argue whether these small trades made the tanners rich or simply kept them fed. You can see the answer in their faces, lean-lined but with a spark of cunning in their eyes. They know the value of every scrap, every inch of hide, and they'll fight for every coin it can bring. As the night draws in, the tannery glows with the soft light of lamps and the low murmur of voices. The hides lie in neat piles, the scraps gathered and sorted, the tools cleaned and oiled for another day. It's a moment of stillness in the tannery's endless churn, a quiet testament to the work that never ends. You take one last look at the finished leather, the smooth supple sheets that will become so many things in so many lives. It's easy to forget looking at them now, the stink and the toil that brought them here. But in the flicker of the lamplight you see the truth written in every line of the workers' faces. This is where the world begins, in the scrape and the soak and the stubborn will to make something that lasts. The tannery's rhythms never truly stop, even as night settles in around the flickering lamps and the low, steady hum of labour. You move quietly, listening to the soft scrape of knives and the sigh of water in the troughs. There's an old story that you hear whispered here, a tale of the tanner's supposed immunity to the very sickness that stalked the rest of the medieval world. A mainstream historical fact, medieval Europe was no stranger to disease. Plagues and fevers moved through the towns like ghosts claiming rich and poor alike. But in the tanner's quarter, there were persistent rumour that the stink and the filth somehow kept them safe, that no pestilence could take root in the reek of the tannery. You hear a man murmur to his mate, "Aye, they say we're too foul for the Black Death itself." His tone is half joking, half believing. You can't blame him. When death lurks in every shadow, even the faintest hope can feel like a lifeline. Historians still argue whether this legend has any basis in truth. Some say the constant exposure to bacteria and noxious fumes might have offered a crude protection, an accidental armour in a world without antibiotics. Others insist it was wishful thinking, A story born of desperation and repeated until it felt like fact. A quirky detail you might not expect: some medieval doctors recommended the tanner's air as a sort of medicine the foul vapours thought to purge the body of worse humours. It's a theory that would make modern physicians blanch. But to a world that saw sickness as a punishment from God, it made a strange sort of sense. You watch as a boy listens wide-eyed to an older man who tells the tale with a wry grin. My grandsire worked. These pits never took sick a day in his life, he says, wiping his hands on a stained apron. They say the rot itself keeps the plague at bay, like a devil fighting a worse devil. The boy nods solemnly, his eyes shining with belief. You see the flicker of uncertainty, though, in the way the older man glances over his shoulder as if daring the sickness to come. In a world without answers, even the strongest faith can feel like a fragile thing. A woman nearby stirs a barrel of dog dung, her face turned away from the rising steam. Her hands move with practiced ease, but you see the tightness in her shoulders, the way her eyes flick to the doorway where the cold night air waits. Maybe she believes the story too. Maybe it's the only thing that lets her sleep at night, knowing the danger that lurks beyond these walls. A mainstream historical fact worth repeating: during the Black Death of the 14th century, entire villages were wiped out, their homes left to rot. But records show that Tanner's district sometimes suffered less, whether from luck, from the nature of their work, or from the fact that no one wanted to come near them. The historians still can't agree, but the legend endures. The workers here don't seem to mind the debate. They have their own truths, their own small comforts. In the laughter that bubbles up between tasks, in the quiet moments, when hands rest on knife handles, you see the deep belief that they're different, that the stink and the toil are more than just survival, they're protection. A boy leans close to you, his grin wide and a little cheeky. "Think you'll catch the plague in here?" he asks, his eyes bright with mischief. You shake your head and he laughs, darting away with a quick, sure step. It's a small joke, but it carries a weight you can feel in your bones. Historians still argue whether these stories were a comfort or a curse. Did they help the tanners face each new day with a little more courage, or did they trap them in a cycle of filth and superstition? You suspect it's both. In the flickering torchlight, the line between protection and prison blurs until it's hard to see where one ends and the other begins. You watch as the workers clean their knives and pack away their scraps, the night drawing in close around them. The lamps gutter in the chill wind, but the tanner's laughter holds steady, a quiet song of defiance against the dark. In this place of stink and steam, of legend and labour, you see the stubborn will that has kept these men and women working the hides for centuries. It's more than just leather they shape here. It's the old stories, the whispered prayers, the belief that in the heart of the tannery's filth, there's something that keeps the world's worst terrors at bay. You take one last breath of the tannery's thick air, the sharp tang of dog dung and lime, and you feel a strange, fleeting sense of comfort. Maybe the tanners are right. Maybe there's something in the stink, something that keeps the sickness away. Or maybe it's just the strength in their hands and the faith in their hearts, the oldest cure of all. The tannery is never truly quiet, even in the stillness of night. You move closer to the edge of the yard, where the runoff from the pits trickles away in dark, greasy rivulets. The water here isn't fresh or sweet, it's thick with the slop of soaking hides, the residue of rot and ruin. You can almost taste the tang of it on the back of your throat. A mainstream historical fact: in medieval towns, tanneries were almost always built along rivers or streams. Water was life in this trade water, to soak the hides, water to rinse them, clean water to carry away the filth that no one else wanted to see. But that same water, churning with the tannery's refuse, was a curse as much as a blessing. You watch a boy empty a bucket into the narrow channel that runs past the yard, the liquid swirling with streaks of brown and yellow. He doesn't flinch at the splash or the stink. This is just another task. Another small step in the endless cycle of survival. The stream gurgles and flows on, carrying the tannery's leavings down to the river. In some towns, people downstream would curse the tanners for fouling their drinking water. In others, they'd turn a blind eye because leather was too precious, too necessary to risk offending the men and women who made it. Historians still argue whether towns did enough to protect themselves from this constant tide of filth. Records show that some cities built elaborate systems of channels and sluices trying to separate the tannery's waste from the water they drank. But the smell was always there, a sour note that lingered in every cup of ale, every pot of stew. A quirky detail you might not expect in some medieval towns, tanners had to pay special fees for the privilege of fouling the waterways. It was a sort of unspoken tax on stink away for the towns to acknowledge the tannery's role, even as they tried to keep its filth at bay. You see a woman rinsing a hide in the trickling stream, her face pale in the lamplight. She dips the leather again and again, each motion careful, almost reverent. The water runs dark around her fingers, but she doesn't pause. The hide must be clean, or it will rot. And if it rots, the family goes hungry. A mainstream historical fact worth pausing on. The runoff from tanneries wasn't just unsightly, it carried disease. In a world without modern sanitation, the bacteria and chemicals in this water could spread sickness faster than any rat. But for the tanners there was no choice. The hides had to be worked, the water had to be used, and the stink had to be carried away. You hear the low murmur of voices as workers gather near the water's edge. They talk of prices and guild rules, of the merchant who tried to cheat them last week, of the child who slipped in the pit but climbed back out grinning. Their words are low and calm, a steady current of life that runs through even this filth. One of the men bends to wash his hands in the dirty stream, the water turning red around his fingers. He glances up at you, his eyes sharp but not unfriendly. "Better this than no water at all," he says with a shrug. You nod, though the words taste bitter in your mouth. Historians still argue whether the townsfolk truly understood the risk, or if they simply didn't care so long as the tanners kept the leather flowing. You wonder if that same carelessness still lives on in every tap that turns and every faucet that runs. Clean the past's filth, hidden away by modern pipes and silent pumps. You watch as a child skips a stone across the murky water, her laughter bright against the dark. It's a small rebellion, a spark of joy in a world that seems built of work and waste. The stone bounces once, twice, before sinking into the swirling brown. She claps her hands, her smile defiant and proud. A man nearby shakes his head with a grin. "She'll be a tanner's wife one day, mark my words," he says, his voice warm. "She's already got the stomach for it." You laugh, though the joke is dark. There's no romance in this water, no poetry in its stink. But there is life stubborn and unyielding, and that's something worth noticing. As the night deepens, the water's soft song mingles with the low hum of voices and the faint scrape of knives in the tannery yard. You take one last look at the stream, the way it carries the tannery's filth down to the river, out to the world beyond. It's a reminder that nothing in medieval life was ever truly separate, every choice left a stain, every trade a mark on the land and the people who called it home. You turn away, the stink still heavy in your nose, and you wonder how many towns forgot the price of leather once the goods were made. You wonder how many still do. The tannery's waste trickles away in the shadows, but here in the yard another truth takes shape, the curious economics of stink. You pause to watch as two men haggle over a pile of freshly scraped hides, their voices low but urgent. In this place of filth and endless labour, profit still whispers in every scrap of leather. A mainstream historical fact-tanning was a surprisingly lucrative trade in medieval Europe. Despite the stigma, the stench and the low social standing, tanners often made good money enough to keep a family fed, to pay the rent, to put a little aside for lean winters. The leather they produced was too essential, too valuable to the world outside these foul walls. You see it in the small, sharp glances the workers exchange as they talk prices and weight in the careful way they measure out the hides. Every inch of leather is worth something, every inch another chance to turn the stink into survival. A woman holds up a strip of soft, supple leather, her fingers tracing the grain like a lover's caress. "Best I've seen in months," she murmurs, her voice warm with pride. She knows what this piece will fetch at market, knows the cobbler who'll pay top coin for it, the merchant who'll haggle but not too hard. In the tannery, everyone is a merchant, every scrap a small treasure. A quirky detail that might surprise you in some towns, the value of leather scraps was so well known that tanners kept secret ledgers, little books of numbers hidden away from prying eyes. In these pages, every hide was recorded, every scrap tracked a quiet testament to the cunning that kept this trade alive. You watch a boy drag a bundle of leather across the yard, his face set in fierce concentration. He's learning the trade of bartering as much as the trade of scraping. The way his eyes dart to the older men, the way he listens to every word of their bargaining, it's as much a part of his education as the knife in his small hand. Historians still argue whether this prosperity was real or just a fleeting illusion. Some say the tanners made enough to rise above the stink to find a small comfort in the world beyond the pits. Others insist they were always teetering on the edge of ruin, the next bad season or sudden illness enough to send them tumbling back into poverty. You see the truth in the way the workers move, cautious but quick, shrewd but never careless. They know how quickly fortune can shift in a world where every hide is a gamble, every customer a potential trickster. And yet they keep going, keep measuring and weighing and arguing, because in the stink of the tannery there's still the promise of a meal, a warm bed, a life worth living. A mainstream historical fact worth noting, the best leather, thick, strong and soft, was prized across Europe, traded from Flanders to Florence, from London to Lubeck. It clothed knights and clerics, peasants and merchants, a bridge between the roughest labour and the highest halls of power. And it all began here in the slow dance of labour and filth. You watch as the men strike a deal, their hands clasping in a firm, almost solemn grip. There's a respect in that handshake, a recognition that in this world of rot and refuse they've found a way to carve out something that matters. You see it in the flicker of relief in their eyes, the way their shoulders straighten just a little as they turn back to their work. A boy tugs at your sleeve, his grin quick and bright. "Best scraps go to the glove makers," he says proudly. "Softest leather, softest hands." There's a twinkle of mischief in his gaze, a flash of the merchant's cunning that lives even in the youngest here. You can't help but smile. In the tannery's stink and shadows there's a strange sort of hope. The hides they shape might start in blood and shit, but they end in something that matters. Something that can warm a child's feet, bind a book of prayers, hold the sword of a knight. And in every deal struck, every scrap bartered, there's a piece of that hope, that quiet faith in the worth of their labour. The lamps flicker in the night, casting long shadows across the yard. The workers move like ghosts, their laughter low and their hands quick, their eyes bright with the knowledge that even in the foulest corners of the world there's still a trade to be made, still a living to be earned. You take one last look at the deals struck in whispers, the leather stacked in careful piles, the glances that weigh and measure even as they smile. In the tannery's sour air you find a lesson as old as time. There is always value even in the stink. Always something worth the scrape and the stink and the sweat. As you move through the tannery you hear the sounds of life beyond the yard, music and laughter, the distant hum of voices. It's festival season in the town, a time when even the poorest find a reason to dance. But here at the edge of the square, the tanner's place is never certain. You see them standing in small groups, leather aprons tied tight to their eyes, bright but cautious. A mainstream historical fact, medieval festivals were the bright heart of the year, moments when the world turned itself inside out with music, games and feasting. But for tanners, these festivals were complicated. Their labour was needed: leather goods to sell straps, to mend goods for barter, but their presence was not always welcome. The smell followed them, a ghost of the tannery that clung to their skin even in the bright sun of the fair. You watch as a man lifts a stack of leather goods onto a cart, his hands quick and sure, despite the stiffness of his knuckles. His wife walks beside him, her hair tied back with a strip of soft hide, her eyes wary. They move together through the festival crowd, weaving between jugglers and musicians, their wares piled high and their heads held low. A quirky tidbit: in some towns, tanners were forbidden to set up stalls near the food markets during festivals. The fear was simple: no one wanted to taste bread with a whiff of dog dung in the air. And so the tanners found themselves at the edge of the celebration, close enough to sell but never quite invited to the dance. You see a young boy with a stack of rough-cut scraps, his face bright with the hope of a quick sale. He darts through the crowd like a shadow, calling out prices with a voice that cracks like a whip. The other children give him a wide berth. No one wants to play tag with the tanner's boy, not when he smells like the pits. But he doesn't seem to care. His eyes are sharp, his grin quick. He knows the worth of his scraps, and he'll find a buyer before the day is done. Historians still argue whether these festivals were a chance for tanners to show off their skill, or just another reminder of their place at the edge of things. Some say the fairs offered them a rare chance to sell directly to earn coin without the middlemen who always took a cut. Others say the tanners came home from these days with more insults than profits, their goods sold cheap to those who wouldn't shake their hands. You watch a woman lay out a row of soft, supple gloves on a rough plank table. She smooths each pair with a tenderness that belies the roughness of her trade. Her fingers are cracked and red, but she handles the leather like velvet. A customer pauses, admiring the fine stitching, but you see the quick wrinkle of his nose, the subtle step back. He buys a pair anyway. Need always outweighs disgust in the end. A mainstream historical fact worth noting: leather was a luxury for some and a necessity for most. At these festivals, tanners could sell to merchants and travelling traders who carried the hides to distant towns. The best pieces might end up on a lord's horse, the scraps in a farmer's boots. The tannery's stink didn't matter when the leather was good. You see a small girl tuck a strip of soft leather into her pocket, her eyes shining with the small treasure. Her mother scolds her gently, but there's a smile there too. Even in this place of shadows there's room for a little wonder: a ribbon of leather to tie a doll's hair, a scrap to braid into a charm. The festival swirls around the tanner's music and laughter carried on the wind. But here in their small corner the workers watch with careful eyes, their laughter low and wry. They know their place close enough to sell, never close enough to dance. Yet they stand their ground, proud and unbowed. Historians still argue whether these days were good for the tanners or just another stage of their exclusion. But you see it in the way they straighten their shoulders, the way they hold their heads high, even as the crowd wrinkles its nose. They may stink, but their leather speaks for them. It's soft and strong and made with hands that know the worth of every cut, every scrape. As the festival fades into the twilight, the tanners pack their goods away. The laughter of the fair echoes in the distance, but here there's only the quiet pride of work well done. You watch them shoulder their scraps and their tools, turning back to the tannery's dark embrace. And you realise that for these men and women the festival is just another market, another chance to turn scraps into coin. The music and the dancing belong to others, but the leather belongs to them. In every scrap sold, every glove fitted to a merchant's hand, there's a quiet triumph that no music can drown out. The night deepens and the festival's echoes fade into memory. Back in the tannery's yard you see the workers gathered around a table, lit by a single flickering lamp. They're sharing a meal of bread and cheese, the crusts tough but welcome after a day spent selling leather. There's no music here, no dancers' laughter, but there's a sense of camaraderie that's just as bright. A mainstream historical fact: in medieval Europe, leather was more than just a material, it was a symbol of power. The finest hides became belts for knights, scabbards for swords, and the soft linings of noblemen's gloves. Leather meant status, a tangible link between the humble tanner and the high-born world that lived in castles and courts. You watch as a man runs his fingers along a strip of thick, well-cured hide. For a lord's saddle, he murmurs a small smile on his cracked lips. He knows the journey this piece will take, knows that one day it will carry a noble's weight in the charge of battle. It's a small glory, but in this place of filth and toil, even that is something to savour. A young boy listens with wide eyes, the flicker of the lamp dancing in his gaze. You can see the dreams there, the hope that one day his work might find its way to a king's court, that the stink of the tannery might be forgotten in the glow of the noble's hall. A quirky tidbit: some medieval knights believed that leather gear made by the best tanners offered better protection in battle. It was said that a belt or a saddle made by a master tanner could save a man's life when steel clashed and arrows flew. Whether true or not, the tanners took pride in every stitch, every scrape, knowing that somewhere their work might shape the fate of kingdoms. You see a woman sorting scraps by the dim light, her fingers quick and sure even after a day of labour. Each piece of leather has a purpose, nothing is wasted, nothing is left behind. In a world where so many hands fight for so little, this careful thrift is more than habit, it's survival. Historians still argue whether the tanners felt any connection to the knights and nobles who wore their leather. Some say the gulf was too wide, the stink of the pits too deep. Others insist there was a secret pride in knowing that even the highest lords depended on the work of the lowest hands. You watch the workers share a quiet joke, the sound low and warm in the night. Softest leather for the softest backsides, one man says, and they all laugh, though there's a note of something else there too, bitterness maybe, or just the weary knowledge that the rich will always ride on the backs of the poor. A mainstream historical fact worth pausing on: medieval sumptuary laws regulated what people could wear based on their rank and wealth. Leather was one of the few exceptions. It crossed every line, binding together those who would never share a meal or a prayer. From the king's hunting gloves to the peasant's work boots, leather was the silent thread that held them all. You watch as the workers finish their meal, wiping crumbs from their aprons, and turn back to their piles of leather. The night is cold, the air heavy with the tannery's sour perfume, but they work on with the same quiet determination. In their hands, scraps become straps, rough hides become fine goods. It's a transformation as real as any alchemy, born of sweat and patience, and a stubborn refusal to be broken. A boy kneels to tie a bundle of thin strips, his fingers moving deftly. You see the pride in his small square shoulders, the knowledge that this work, however dirty, is his own. In a world that offers little but the promise of more toil, that pride is worth more than gold. Historians still argue whether the tanner's work was truly valued by those it served, or if it was just another commodity used and forgotten. You watch the boy's careful fingers, the man's quiet smile, the woman's measured motions, and you think, maybe it doesn't matter. Because here in the tannery's shadows, they know the worth of what they make, even if the world never sees it. As the lamp flickers low, the workers rise and gather their tools ready for another day. The piles of leather stand stacked and waiting silent witnesses to the labour that shapes them. You watch as the last of the bread is packed away, the laughter fades, and the tannery returns to its quiet hum. In the end, leather isn't just hide, it's history, a record of the lives spent scraping and soaking and stitching in the shadows. And as you turn away, the stink of the tannery in your nose, you know that somewhere in the quiet halls of a castle, or the dusty boots of a traveller, a piece of this night's labour will live on. The tannery doesn't sleep, not even when the frost begins to creep across the yard. You feel the bite of winter in the air, sharp and clean a cold, that cuts through the tannery's perpetual stench and makes you shiver in your cloak. But the tanners don't have that luxury. Even in winter, the hides must be worked, the vats kept from freezing the leather, made ready for a world that doesn't stop just because the nights grow long. A mainstream historical fact, medieval winters were brutal, and for the poor they could be deadly. But in the tannery there was no pause, no relief. The hides had to be soaked and scraped and dried no matter how the wind howled or the ice crept into the cracks of stone and bone. You watch as a woman bends over a vat, her breath steaming in the cold air. She wears a thick woolen shawl, but her fingers are bare red and raw from the icy water. She works with a kind of grim patience, each scrape of the knife a small battle against the numbness that creeps into her hands. A man nearby dips a hide into a barrel of lime, his movements slow and deliberate. The lime burns even more fiercely in the cold, biting into skin, already cracked by frost. But he doesn't flinch, he can't afford to. The hides must be worked or they'll stiffen and rot, and then there will be nothing to sell when the thaw finally comes. A quirky tidbit, some medieval tanners believed that the cold air actually made better leather firmer, tougher, more suited to the demands of winter boots and heavy coats. Whether true or not, the workers here embrace the cold as just another part of the trade, another challenge to meet with the same quiet stubbornness. You see a boy carrying a bucket of water, his arms trembling with the weight. The water sloshes over the rim, freezing in thin sheets across the wooden sides before it even touches the ground. He pauses to rub his hands together, his breath coming in quick white puffs. Then he lifts the bucket again, his face set in fierce determination. Historians still argue whether the cold brought more danger or more discipline to these workers. Some say the winter air toughened them, hardened them against the world's indifference. Others insist it was just another cruelty, another way the world tried to break them. Watching them now, you see the truth is somewhere in between each scrape of the knife, each careful lift of the bucket a testament to their will to endure. The cold changes the tannery's music. The scrape of knives is sharper, the splash of water more brittle. Each breath, a quiet chorus of survival. You watch as the workers pause to warm their hands over a brazier, the brief glow of heat, a small mercy in a world that offers few. A mainstream historical fact worth pausing on in winter. The work was even harder, the dangers more real. Slippery stones turned the yard into a death trap, frozen hides cracked and tore under careless hands. But still the workers laboured on because there was no other choice, no other warmth, but the slow patient burn of work done well. A young woman stands at the edge of the yard, her shoulders hunched against the wind. She holds a small strip of leather, testing its strength with careful fingers. You see the pride in her eyes as she tugs at it, the quiet triumph in knowing that even in the dead of winter she can still make something that lasts. A boy laughs as he slips on a patch of ice, his feet skidding out from under him. The sound is bright and sharp, a spark of joy in the cold air. The older men shake their heads, but you see the faint smile in their eyes, a small moment of levity in a world that rarely grants them one. Historians still argue whether winter made better leather or just tougher workers. You watch the woman's careful hands, the boy's quick laughter, the man's steady scrape of the knife, and you think it doesn't matter. Because here in the tannery's frozen yard the work goes on, and in that work there's a kind of warmth that no winter can steal. As the night deepens, the frost creeps in around the edges of the lamps, turning every breath into a ghostly cloud. But the workers don't stop. The hides must be tended, the leather must be made. And in every scrape of the knife, every careful tug of the hide, you see the quiet, stubborn heartbeat of the tannery beating on through the cold. In the tannery's dim yard, beneath the sigh of winter winds and the constant splash of cold water, you start to notice the small signs of belief, the talismans and odd remedies that cling to this world of labour and stink like the hides themselves. In a place where every day is a battle against decay and disease, superstition finds a home in every scrap of leather and every whispered prayer. A mainstream historical fact, medieval Europe was a world of faith and folklore where the line between cure and charm was thin. The tanners who lived and worked in the shadow of death and rot held fast to their own strange mix of remedies and superstitions. You see a man pause in his work to touch a small leather charm hanging from his neck, a tiny square stamped with a symbol you don't recognise. He presses it to his lips for a heartbeat, his fingers lingering as if to draw strength from it. Then he goes back to his scraping his face, calm once more. A woman nearby has tucked a sprig of dried herbs into the folds of her apron, the sharp, clean scent of rosemary cutting through the tannery's stench. She says it keeps away the fevers, though you suspect it's as much for comfort as for cure. In a place where the air itself seems to seep into your bones, even a small breath of green is a kind of magic. A quirky tidbit that makes you smile. Some tanners believed that scraps of leather from particularly fine hides could protect a child from nightmares. They'd cut tiny shapes, a moon, a star, a heart, and slip them under the straw of the child's bed. A strange, sweet charm in a world of hard edges. Historians still argue whether these little rituals had any real power, or were just a balm for weary souls. Some say the herbs and charms had no more effect than a whispered lullaby. Others insist there's a strength in belief itself, a power in the act of saying, "I will endure." You watch as a young boy dips his fingers into a bucket of lime, then quickly wipes them on his tunic, muttering something under his breath. A charm or a prayer, it's hard to tell in the flickering light, but you see the fear in his eyes, the determination not to let it show. In this world, even the smallest superstition can feel like armour. A mainstream historical fact worth pausing on medieval medicine was a strange blend of ancient science and old magic. Remedies for the burns and sores of the tannery might include vinegar and honey, but just as often they called for charms and whispered words, protection against the hidden dangers that no blade could cut. You hear a woman laugh softly as she rubs her hands with a paste of animal fat and ash, claiming it will keep her skin from cracking in the cold. Better than any doctor, she says with a wink. You're not sure if she believes it, or if she's just found a way to keep hope alive on nights when the frost bites, and the stink seems to settle into your bones. The workers here have their own small rituals, a scratch of leather nailed above the doorway, a circle of salt around the edge of a pit, a song half sung as they stir the vats. These aren't just superstitions, they're threads of faith in a world that offers few other comforts. In the tannery, where every day means standing knee-deep in rot, you can't blame them for finding solace where they can. Historians still argue whether the medieval tanners' superstitions were a burden or a blessing. But you see the way the workers pause to touch a charm, the way they murmur a quick prayer before lifting a hide from the pit, and you think, maybe it doesn't matter. In a world of endless toil and constant risk, these small rituals are more than just habit. They're a way to keep a bit of light alive in the shadows. As the night deepens and the frost grows thick on the edges of the vats, you see the workers draw closer together. Their laughter is softer now, but no less warm. They trade old stories of charms that worked, and spirits that linger in the tannery's dark corners. They share bits of bread and sips of thin ale, the small comforts that make the long hours easier to bear. You take one last look at the charms tucked into belts and the herbs twined around wooden beams. In the tannery's grim world of scraping knives and endless stink, these small signs of faith are as vital as the hides they cure. Because in the end, it's not just the leather that must be shaped and saved, it's the spirit too. The tannery seems to sigh around you as the night stretches on. The last of the workers finish their tasks, scraping knives, wiped clean barrels, covered to keep the frost from hardening the slop within. In the flicker of the dying lamps, you see the long echoes of a world that has been worked into these stones, these hides, these hands. You pause by the low doorway where the oldest tanner sits, his back curved like an ancient bow. His hands rest in his lap, the fingers twisted by years of cold water and lime, but his eyes are bright and sharp in the gloom. It all fades. He murmurs, his voice soft but certain. The leather, the stink, the strength. But it lives on too. He lifts a scrap of soft cured leather, stroking it like a beloved pet. In here it never really dies. A mainstream historical fact, by the end of the medieval period, the world of the tanner was already changing. New trades, new markets, new ideas about how to work leather and who should do it. The tanneries that had once fed whole villages began to dwindle their place in the town's life, taken by merchants and traders who cared more for coin than craft. You watch as the workers gather their tools, packing them with the same care they give to the hides. A small boy tucks a dull blade into his belt, his face set with the fierce pride of someone who knows his hands can make something strong from something rotten. A woman rolls up a strip of hide with the tenderness of a mother swaddling a child. A quirky tidbit: in some towns the last tanners left strange marks in the alleys and doorways, scratches of knives or the shapes of leaves pressed into the wood, small echoes of their trade left behind like ghosts. Historians still find these marks today, silent reminders of lives spent in the stink and the scrape. You see the last of the scraps swept into buckets, the water in the pits grown still. The laughter that once bubbled up between jokes and curses has faded to a soft murmur, the gentle hum of survival. Even now there is work to be done, scraps to sort, tools to oil, stories to share before the lamps burn out. Historians still argue whether the end of the tanner's world was a mercy or a loss. Some say the stench was too great, the filth too deep, and good riddance to the old ways. Others mourn the skill, the stubborn pride, the strange camaraderie that once bound these workers tighter than any guild seal. You watch as a man lifts a strip of finished leather, holding it up to the lamplight one last time. The glow catches the smooth grain, turning it soft and golden for a fleeting moment. A good piece, he says quietly, will last longer than I will. And you see in that small reverent gesture the truth that no historian can ever fully capture. The tannery's legacy is not just the leather it left behind, but the spirit of those who shaped it. A mainstream historical fact worth repeating: the tanner's trade, for all its filth and hardship, was the backbone of medieval life. From the boots on a knight's feet to the belts that cinched a peasant's tunic, the work of the tanner was never truly forgotten, just hidden beneath the polish of the new world. As the last lamp sputters and the tannery sinks into darkness, you take one last breath of the rank, heavy air. You know that tomorrow it will start again, new hides, new cuts, new jokes whispered over the vats. But for now there is a quiet that feels almost holy, a brief pause in the endless churn. You turn away, your footsteps soft on the cold stones, the memories of the tannery's labour clinging to you like the faint scent of leather. The stink may fade, but the echoes of this place will linger just as they always have. The tannery's yard falls silent as the final echoes of work fade into the night. You pause, taking one last look at the dark pits and the quiet heaps of leather, each a small testament to centuries of labour and the stubborn will to survive. The air is still thick with the tannery's scent, a bitter perfume of lime and rot that clings to your thoughts even as you step away. In the soft hush of the winter night, the memory of these workers lingers. You can almost hear the low scrape of knives, the gentle splash of water, the muffled laughter that carried them through another long cold day. It's a music all its own, woven into the stone and wood of this ancient place. You feel the weight of it in your breath, the quiet power of lives spent in the service of something both humble and grand. Here in the tannery's quiet end, you understand that history isn't just written in the shining halls of kings or the blooded fields of battle. It's etched in the rough calluses of hands that scraped and soaked and stitched in the shadows. As you turn away, the night feels softer, the stars above a quiet promise that even the foulest labour can hold a spark of dignity, a glimmer of grace. The tannery's world was a world of hardship and filth, yes, but also one of laughter and pride, of small kindnesses shared beneath the endless stench. So close your eyes now and let the tannery's echoes fade into the gentle hush of sleep. Let the quiet strength of these forgotten workers keep you warm as the night drifts in. The world is softer now, the weight of history gentler on your heart. Rest easy.